I can still hear the sound of the door closing. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a movie-worthy ending. It was a soft, almost polite click that cut my life in two. Before and after. I was sitting on the living room floor, my 2-month-old baby nursing at my breast, when I realized that sound wasn't just an exit. It was abandonment. It was him leaving me alone with a human being who could barely hold his own head up, and with a woman who no longer had the strength to hold on to her own life. There was no warning. There was no serious conversation days before. There was no "we need to talk." There was accumulated exhaustion, prolonged silence, avoided glances. There was him spending more time on his cell phone than looking at his son. There were excuses about work, meetings, urgent commitments. And above all, there was a phrase thrown into the air a few hours before he left that I didn't understand at the time, but that today echoes in my head like a red flag I ignored. I wasn't born for this. At that moment, busy changing diapers and counting the hours of sleep in minutes, I didn't realize that this was fatherhood. I just kept going because mothers don't have dramatic pauses. Mothers keep going. When I truly realized he was missing, it wasn't when the door closed. It was the following morning, 2:30. My breasts ached with so much milk, my body trembling with exhaustion, my baby crying incessantly. The entire apartment plunged into a silence that seemed to mock me. I looked around, instinctively searching for someone to take turns holding the baby, to hold him for 5 minutes while I caught my breath, drank a glass of water, washed my face. There was no one. Just me, a hungry newborn, and an overdue electricity bill on the table. It was there, in that early morning, that it hit me. I had been abandoned, not just as a woman. I had been abandoned as a mother. He hadn't left me. He had left us, his son. The crying, the diapers, the milk bill, the rent, the dark circles under his eyes, the sleepless nights, the bills, the responsibility. He had chosen his own peace over our survival. And I stayed. I wish I could say that at that moment I had a surge of strength, that I heroically stood up, promised myself that I could handle everything, and that I would never shed another tear because of him. But the truth is, I cried. I cried with my son in my arms, crying along with me. I cried from fear, from anger, from exhaustion. I cried because I knew that my whole life had just changed, and no one had asked me if I was ready, because I wasn't. The next morning, the house seemed bigger, empty. His clothes were still in the closet, his toothbrush was still in the bathroom, the scent of his cologne was still on the pillow. Physical things remained, but his presence was gone. And along with it, half the household income, half the sleep, half the plan I had made when I found out I was pregnant. I looked at my baby sleeping in the makeshift stroller next to the kitchen table and felt a weight in my chest that wasn't just love. It was panic. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart for long. He woke up crying, asking for my breast, asking to be held, asking for a whole mother when all I had to offer were pieces. I sat down, put him to breastfeed, and started doing calculations in my head. The rent was due in 10 days. The diaper supply was enough for a week. The can of formula, which I used when my breast couldn't cope, was half empty. My maternity leave was ending in less than a month. And I knew, with frightening clarity, that no one was coming to save us. That's when a phrase was born inside me, not as a beautiful promise, but as a survival instinct. I'm going to have to manage. There was no other way. There was no turning back. There were no parentheses. I was going to have to manage feeding my baby, paying bills, keeping a roof over our heads, and somehow not going crazy in the process. And I was going to have to do it with a body still recovering from childbirth, with hormones at war inside me, and with a newly shattered heart. The following days were a confusing mix of action and denial. In the morning, I would wake up and act, bathe the baby, breastfeed, wash dishes, answer work messages, try to organize some routine within the chaos. At night, when the house finally became quiet and the baby slept for a few minutes at a time, a flood of thoughts would come. Why did he do that? What did I do wrong? How am I going to pay the next rent? What if I fail? I even picked up my phone a few times, opened the conversation with him, typed huge texts asking for explanations, asking for help, basically asking him to come back. I deleted everything before sending it, not because I was strong, but because I already knew the answer. He hadn't left by mistake. It had been a choice. On the third day after he left, while I was cradling my baby in my arms, trying to soothe a seemingly endless cry, another realization hit me. I didn't have the right to fall apart. I could cry, yes. It could hurt, yes. But I didn't have the right to give up, because while he was gone, someone else was left behind. A tiny 2-month-old being who hadn't asked to be born, who didn't know what abandonment was, who had no idea that the person who had helped raise him had decided to disappear. He wasn't to blame for anything, and he needed all of me. It was there, with my arm aching from rocking so much, my nightgown stained with milk, my head throbbing with exhaustion, that another phrase was born within me, stronger, harder, more definitive. If he's not going to be a father, I'm going to have to be both father and mother. I didn't know how. I didn't have a manual. I didn't have money to spare. But I had one thing he clearly didn't have: commitment. I remember exactly the night I made the decision that would change everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the bank statement on my phone, and saw the number staring back at me. It was almost nothing. It wasn't enough for a month's rent. It wasn't enough for diapers, milk, or medicine if he got sick. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and understood what needed to be done. I was going to get more than one job. Not because I wanted to, not because I dreamed of it, but because I needed to. Working one job wouldn't be enough anymore. I was going to have to work 2, then 3. This is the part of the story where many people expect to hear about the anger that drove me, about the desire to prove to him that I could manage without him. But the truth is far less romantic. What pushed me was my son's crying. It was the sound of his stomach rumbling when he was late for a feeding. It was the paralyzing fear of one day looking at my plate and having nothing to put on it. It wasn't pride, it was survival. When people look at me today and say I'm strong, that they admire my courage, that they would do anything for their children, I smile. But inside, I know, I didn't choose to be strong. I was pushed into a fire with a baby in my arms. Either I learned to cross the fire, or we both burned together. And it was there, in the middle of the flames, that a single mother was born. In the next part, I'll tell you about taking that first step. Leaving home with a 2-month-old baby in my arms to look for not just 1, but 3 jobs, with no one to leave him with, no plan B, no certainty other than this. I wasn't going to let my son go hungry, even if it cost me every last bit of myself. The day I left home to look for work with a 2-month-old baby in my arms, it wasn't courage. It was organized desperation in the form of steps. I remember looking in the mirror before leaving and almost not recognizing myself. Deep, dark circles under my eyes, my hair tied up haphazardly, a shirt stained with milk, and an invisible scar on my chest, right where illusion dies and reality begins. I fastened the sling to my body, nestled my son there, pressed tightly against my chest, and thought, if the world wants to swallow me, it'll have to swallow us together. I had no one to leave him with. I didn't have a mother available, no mother-in-law, no close neighbor, no money for a babysitter. So I took with me what many people would call an obstacle, but which for me was precisely the reason I was there. My son. Every shop door, every office reception, every coffee counter received the same version of my story, sometimes with more details, sometimes summarized in a dry phrase. I need to work. I have a 2-month-old baby. I accept any hours. People's expressions changed when they saw the sling. Some felt pity. Others hardened instantly, as if the simple fact that I was a single mother automatically made me a potential problem. I felt the judgment even before I opened my mouth. You'll be absent for a long time. You'll always be bringing home sick children. You won't be able to keep up. The corporate world wasn't made for those who breastfeed in the middle of the night and wake up with leaking breasts. But I wasn't there to fit into the world. I was there to carve out a space for myself, by force. My first job came about almost ironically, a 24-hour diner. Minimum wage, terrible hours, no benefits besides a hideous uniform and the right to eat at the end of my shift. But it was something. It was a start. I accepted without negotiating, without asking too many questions, without being sure how I would fit it into my life. I only knew that for every hour worked, a can of milk, a pack of diapers, a little security was added to my account. And, at that moment, money meant food, shelter, and medicine. My second job came up in a place I never imagined, cleaning offices early in the morning. The work started at 5 in the morning before everyone else arrived, sweeping, mopping, cleaning bathrooms, taking out the trash, organizing desks. It wasn't glamorous. There were no wheeled chairs, no nice name tags, and no air conditioning at the perfect temperature. But there was bi-weekly pay, and I needed anything that would quickly deposit money into my account, because bills don't wait for emotionally convenient dates. The third opportunity came through a recommendation from a young woman I met at a bus stop. She saw my son in a sling, saw my ID badge from the snack bar, saw my cleaning uniform, and said, "Do you cook?" I replied that I did. She added me to a group that delivered homemade meals, people who cooked at home and sold them through an app. I didn't have an industrial kitchen. I didn't have personalized packaging. I didn't have anything. But I had a pot, a working stove, and the urgency of someone counting pennies at the end of the day. And so I became a registered employee in one place, a cleaner in another, and my own cook in my spare time. What nobody tells you about having 3 jobs with a newborn baby is that there's no such thing as free time. Everything becomes borrowed time from some other need. Sleep, for example, becomes a bargaining chip. I slept in bits and pieces. 40 minutes after he nursed, half an hour on the bus, 15 minutes sitting in the kitchen chair waiting for the beans to cook. My body no longer knew what a full night's rest was. It only understood 2 commands: keep going or pass out. And incredibly, most of the time it chose to keep going. I used to take my son with me when I delivered lunch boxes. I'd put him in a sling, carry the bags, and go, up and down the streets, knocking on gates, climbing stairs, going down hills. When someone opened the door and saw that little bundle sleeping against my chest, sometimes I'd get a smile, sometimes a snide comment. Poor thing, so small out on the street like that. At those times, I'd swallow hard to avoid replying. He'd be so poor if he were at home starving with me lying on the floor. The morning shift started before dawn. I'd wake up at 4, strap my son into the stroller I left next to my neighbor's living room sofa, the only kind soul who agreed, for a symbolic fee, to listen to him cry if he woke up while I was cleaning offices. I'd go out into the street while it was still dark, my body unsteady and my soul sustained by weak coffee. I'd clean desks where people would spend the whole day typing and complaining about meetings that were too long, without imagining that the gleaming floor beneath their feet had been scrubbed by someone who didn't know how much an ergonomic chair cost, but knew exactly the price of a diaper. That shift would end. I'd rush home, grab my son, breastfeed him, take a 5-minute shower, and, if I was lucky, manage to prepare a batch of lunchboxes before heading out to my next job. The kitchen would become an improvised production line. Rice on one burner, chicken on another, vegetables in the oven, baby in the stroller watching me with curious eyes, as if he already understood that this food wasn't just food. It was bills, it was rent, it was milk, it was everything. At night, I'd go to the diner. I'd fry hamburgers, assemble sandwiches, clean tables, listen to people complaining about delayed orders as if it were the end of the world. Sometimes, while I was holding out a tray with some random combo meal, I'd imagine what my life would have been like if I'd been on the other side of the counter, sitting down, relaxed, with plenty of time to complain about how well done my fries were. But that wasn't my place. My place, however unfair it seemed, was there, with my skin burning from hot grease, the smell of oil clinging to my hair, wondering if my son would be sleeping soundly without me. There were nights when, on the way home, my whole body felt like it was begging for mercy. My knees throbbing, my lower back screaming, my head heavy. But then I'd open the door and see him in his crib, breathing deeply, his little arms raised high, and everything would reorganize itself inside me. The exhaustion would become just a backdrop. the tiredness would pale in comparison to the most important image of my life. That chest rising and falling, that little mouth murmuring an almost smile even in his sleep. I'd think, as long as he's sleeping with a full belly, it's worth it. I'm not going to romanticize it. There were days when I wanted to give up everything, when I wondered if it would be so wrong to text him, his father, asking for help, asking for anything. There were moments when I sat on the kitchen floor in the middle of the night with the sink full of dishes and the pot still on the stove and cried silently so as not to wake my son. I wondered, am I destroying myself? Will I be able to endure another month, another week, another day? But at the same time, something was growing inside me, a kind of silent pride. I saw the milk in the cup, the diaper in the drawer, the electricity bill paid, the rent up to date, and I knew with a sharp clarity who had put all that there. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't help from any partner. It was me, with my body, my sweat, my stolen sleep, with my calloused hands and my heart full of fear. It was me. While many people called me a warrior as if it were a compliment, I thought about how I would have preferred not to have to fight so much, how I would have preferred a little peace instead of an imaginary medal. But then I looked at my son and understood that if I was going to fight, it should be for someone who was worth every wound. And he was worth it. In the next stage, I'm going to reveal the part that almost no one sees, the physical and emotional toll of living like this. The crying fits in the diner bathroom, the body collapsing, the guilt that eats away at you when you realize you're so tired that sometimes you can't even have patience with your own child. That's when many single mothers break down, and that's when I almost broke down. There comes a point when the body stops whispering and starts screaming. For me, this happened one night in the middle of a shift at the diner when I was assembling a sandwich and suddenly felt like the floor had tilted. It wasn't a dramatic fainting spell with people rushing around me. It was worse. It was that kind of near fainting where you're still standing, still functioning, but inside, everything is shutting down. My vision blurred for a few seconds. My heart raced. My hand trembled. I leaned on the counter, took a deep breath, and pushed the finished sandwich away as if nothing had happened. The world wasn't going to stop because I was on edge, so I didn't stop either. The exhaustion didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated silently. First, it was just sleep deprivation. Then, body aches that I attributed to the routine. After all, who doesn't get back pain carrying a baby, shopping bags, pots, buckets, all at the same time? Later came the constant headaches. I drank coffee as if it were medicine, thinking that caffeine could replace rest, and for a while it did. Until it didn't anymore. I started forgetting simple things. I'd forget the pot on the stove, forget the day of my vaccination, forget I'd left clothes soaking. Once I almost left for work with the front door unlocked. I was always rushing, always late, always with my head 3 tasks ahead of what my hand could handle. My body, somewhere in the middle of it all, was trying to send me signals: chest pain, tingling in my fingers, shortness of breath halfway up the stairs. I ignored them all with the same answer. I'll deal with that later. I can't right now. But there's one thing. The body doesn't accept later forever. It demands payment up front. One early morning, my baby was crying nonstop, probably from colic, and I simply started crying along with him. Not that quiet, restrained crying. I was sobbing while cradling him in my arms, silently begging him to stop, not because I didn't love him, but because I had no more energy left. I looked at his red little face, his eyes closed from so much effort, and a cruel guilt overwhelmed me. Does he sense that I'm exhausted? Does he realize that I'm at my limit? Guilt is a creature that likes to live in a mother's heart, and in a single mother, it makes its permanent home. I found myself a few times irritated by his crying, irritated by a baby of a few months who couldn't speak, couldn't control himself, knew nothing but hunger, cold, pain, sleepiness. I felt my blood boil when he woke up for the 3rd time on a night when I needed to wake up at 4 to clean the office. And with each drop of irritation came a flood of guilt. I felt like a monster for, on some level, wanting a few minutes of silence, wanting him to sleep just a little longer so I could lie down. My head said, "You're human." My heart replied, "You don't have that right." It was during this phase that the diner's bathroom became my silent confessional. I'd go in, lock the door, rest my head on the cold tile, and let the tears fall silently for 2 timed minutes. 2 minutes of venting, then I'd wipe my face with toilet paper, take a deep breath, and go back to the fryer as if nothing had happened. I didn't have time for full-blown crises. I only had short intervals of collapse between one tray and another. My body started reacting in other ways too. I got sick easily. A flu wasn't just a flu anymore. It was a marathon of trying not to cough on clients, of sneezing while turning my face away, of washing my hands more than usual so as not to bring the virus home. There was no such thing as staying in bed. I could have a fever, my whole body aching, but if I was absent, I didn't get paid. If I didn't get paid, I didn't pay. If I didn't pay, I was absent. And if I was absent, I'd find a way. But not for him. One day, coming back from my morning shift, carrying my son in a sling and 2 grocery bags in my hands, my legs simply froze in the middle of the street. It wasn't acting. Nobody noticed. I stopped walking, leaned against a wall, and stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince my legs to take 3 more steps. I whispered to myself, just to the corner, just to the gate, just to the elevator. I started dividing my life into small physical goals. If I thought about the month, I would fall apart. If I thought about the next step, I could do it. My emotions started to take their toll too. I began to fear everything: fear of getting sick, fear of having an accident on my way to work, fear of not waking up from one of those fragmented naps and my son being left alone crying. I would go to sleep thinking, if anything happens to me, who will take care of him? And the empty answer echoed, nobody. This feeling of being the only barrier between my son and chaos weighed on me in a way that's hard to explain to someone who's never been on the front line of such a small life. There's no plan B. There's no backup. There's no other adult to share the responsibility. If I fall, his world crumbles with me. And this awareness is, at the same time, what kept me standing and what crushed me inside. Many people look at an exhausted single mother and say, "You need to take care of yourself," as if self-care were a matter of willpower and not of time, money, and support. I knew I needed to sleep more, eat better, go to the doctor, get checkups, maybe therapy. I knew all of that, but at what time? With what money? Who would look after my son while I sat in a waiting room? Self-care, at that time, for me, meant being able to take a slightly longer shower on a Sunday when there were fewer meal deliveries. It meant eating the food I had prepared myself for deliveries instead of just snacking on leftovers. The cruelest part is that, in the midst of all this, there was still a voice inside me saying that I wasn't doing enough, that I should give more attention, play more, stimulate more, be more patient, more present, more loving. I felt torn between being a provider and being a mother. When I was with him, my mind was on the bills. When I was working, my heart was at home. I was never fully present anywhere. One day, I reached such a breaking point that my body gave me an ultimatum. I woke up with my left arm numb, my hand tingling, a strange pain in my chest. For a few seconds, I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought, that's it, it's over. My son will grow up without a father and without a mother. Panic came first, but then, soon after, a desperate calm followed. I looked at him, sleeping beside me, and a phrase flashed through my mind like lightning. I can't die now. It wasn't a poetic plea. It was a deal. Right there, in the midst of fear, I promised myself that somehow I would find a way to truly continue living, not just functioning. I didn't have a serious diagnosis. It wasn't a heart attack. It was a combination of extreme stress, anxiety, sleep deprivation, and poor diet. My body was literally screaming at me to stop. I came out of that crisis with an uncomfortable certainty. If I continued like that, at some point, I would really collapse. And if I did collapse, it wouldn't just be me. In the next part, I'll tell you how. Even without easy options, I started to reorganize the struggle. Negotiating schedules, learning to say no, accepting help without feeling like a failure, and, above all, understanding that surviving wasn't just about paying bills and filling plates. It was also about continuing to be a good enough mother so that my son wouldn't grow up with a fed body and an empty heart. After the crisis that confronted me with the possibility of literally stopping halfway, I had to make a choice. Either I changed the way I was living, or my body would make that decision for me. And I couldn't leave that luxury to chance. So one night after putting my son to bed, I sat down, picked up an old notebook, one of those you buy and never use, and started writing. It wasn't a pretty plan. It wasn't a dream map. It was a survival calculation. A raw, almost brutal list. What I could cut, what I could negotiate, what I could ask for, and what I definitely couldn't sustain alone anymore. The first thing I realized was that I was trying to be superhuman, and superhumans don't exist. They get tired, get sick, and break down. So I urgently needed to do something that went against everything I believed up to that point. I needed to accept help. But not just any help. Real help from people who wouldn't demand payment in the form of judgment afterward. And to my surprise, these people existed. I just wasn't seeing them because my pride was taking up too much space. It started with my neighbor, the same one who looked after my son on the mornings I cleaned the office. I always paid her, always treated it as a service. But one day, she looked at me and said, "You don't need to pay me every week. Pay me when you can. I know you're struggling." I wanted to refuse because accepting seemed like admitting weakness, but she continued, "Let me help. Today it's you. Tomorrow it could be me." And that's when I understood receiving help wasn't failing. It was allowing someone else the right to be human with me. I looked up the schedules for my 3 jobs and tried to organize them so I could get at least 1 full night's sleep a week. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I talked to the manager of the diner and explained that I needed at least 1 Sunday off every 2 weeks, otherwise I wouldn't be able to cope. He resisted at first, saying that everyone has problems, that some people also need time off. I looked him in the eye and said, with a firmness I didn't even know I had, "I'm not asking for a gift. I'm saying that if I continue without rest, at some point I'm going to faint in here, and then you'll lose an employee for good." He gave me the day off. In my cleaning job, I negotiated to start half an hour later in exchange for cleaning faster. I cut my coffee break, started bringing my own lunch, and saved on transportation by carpooling with another cleaner who traveled the same route. Every minute, every reel saved became a small breather. They weren't big changes, but, added together, they gave me something I hadn't had in months, a margin for error. The meal delivery business was where I could be most flexible. Instead of accepting all orders, I started setting a limit. 10 meals a day. Not 11, not 15. 10, and only from Monday to Friday. On weekends, I rested or stayed home alone with my son, without a pot, without packaging, without delivery. In the beginning, I lost customers. Some complained, saying I was missing an opportunity. But I was gaining something else, sanity. What surprised me was that, by reducing the quantity, I increased the quality. The lunch boxes got better, the remaining customers started recommending me, and word of mouth worked. I charged a little more because now I knew the value of my time. And those who truly valued the work paid without complaining. I learned a hard but necessary lesson. Not every customer is worth it. Not every opportunity is a real opportunity. Sometimes it's just another way for you to exploit yourself. Help also came from unexpected places. A woman who bought lunch every week found out I was raising my son alone and offered me clothes her son no longer wore. Another gave me a nearly new stroller. A customer at the snack bar, who was a pediatrician, told me he could take my son to his appointment for free just to monitor his development. I cried when he offered that, not because I was used to kindness, but because I had forgotten it existed. But it wasn't all solidarity. Some people judged me. A distant relative said I was playing the victim, that I should have thought better before having a child, that the father also has his side of the story. These phrases hurt more than any physical pain. But I learned to do something essential for my emotional survival: cut people off. Without remorse. If someone didn't add anything positive, they didn't stay. I didn't have the energy to waste explaining my life to people who weren't willing to understand. One of the hardest decisions was seeking free psychological help. I was ashamed, as if needing therapy meant admitting I was too weak. But after weeks of hidden crying spells, of nights when anxiety kept me awake, even with my son sleeping, I understood. Taking care of your mind is also taking care of your body. I managed to get a spot in a university psychology service where the sessions were conducted by supervised interns. It wasn't perfect, but it was supportive, and support at that moment was all I needed. It was in one of those sessions that I finally admitted aloud, "I'm angry with him." It wasn't fleeting anger. It was a deep, ingrained anger, stuck to my bones. Angry that he left. Angry that he was sleeping peacefully while I took 3 buses a day. Angry that he didn't know his son was already crawling, already smiling, already babbling his first sounds. Angry that he chose not to know. And the psychologist told me something that disarms me to this day. You have every right to feel angry, but don't let it consume you. Because in the end, you're the one who pays the price, not him. It was hard to swallow, because deep down, I wanted him to pay. I wanted him to feel the weight of abandoning a child. I wanted him to look in the mirror and be ashamed. But the truth is, I had no control over what he felt, only over what I felt. And if I continued to feed that anger, it would grow and occupy the space that should belong to my son, to my rest, to my peace. I started doing small self-care rituals, nothing grand, drinking a hot tea before bed, applying cream to my hands that were dry from washing so many dishes, listening to music I liked while cooking. Small things that reminded me that I was still a person, not just a machine for producing, cleaning, and caring. And believe me, it made a difference. It didn't solve everything, but it gave me a breath of fresh air. I also learned to say no without giving lengthy explanations. No, I can't work overtime today. No, I can't stay in the group chat complaining about other people's lives. No, I'm not going to justify why I raised my child alone. Each no was a boundary I placed between myself and total collapse. And boundaries, I discovered, aren't walls. They're doors that you choose when to open. My son started to grow. Little by little, he became more independent. He slept for longer periods, cried less, smiled more. Each small achievement of his fueled my spirit. When he started stretching his little arms towards me when he saw me arrive home from work, something inside me reorganized itself. I thought, he knows I'm his, and that's enough. I was no longer on the verge of exploding. It was still difficult, still exhausting. There were still days when I wanted to disappear. But now I had a minimum structure. He had a routine that, although tight, was no longer suicidal. He had some people around him. He had a little more clarity about what I could and could not accept. And above all, I was sure that, if necessary, I could pivot again, reorganize again, start over again, because I had proven to myself that I was capable. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment my son said "mommy" for the first time. It might seem like just a cute milestone in child development, but for me, it was the day I understood that all of that, the tiredness, the pain, the struggle, had a name. And that name was love in the form of presence. To be continued. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for the next day, with my son sitting in his high chair next to me, playing with a wooden spoon and a small plastic pot. He was 9 months old, already sitting up straight, clapping when he was happy, already showing his own personality. But he still hadn't said anything that resembled a real word, until that moment. I was standing with my back to him, stirring the sautéed chicken, when I heard a different sound coming from him. It wasn't crying, it wasn't that meaningless babbling. It was something more articulate. I turned slowly, still with the spoon in my hand, and he looked me straight in the eyes, stretched out his little arms and said, clear as crystal, "Mommy." I dropped the spoon on the floor. It wasn't intentional, it was pure shock. I stood there, looking at him, tears streaming down my face, before I even processed that I was crying. He repeated it, now smiling, as if he knew exactly the gift he had just given me. "Mommy." I picked him up, held him close to my chest, and cried. I cried from exhaustion, from relief, from love, from everything I had held back in the last few months. And, for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a cry of pain. It was a cry of recognition. At that moment, I understood something that no parenting book, no motivational text, no self-help phrase had been able to explain to me. That word wasn't just a developmental milestone. It was physical proof that despite the chaos, despite the absence, despite everything, I had been enough. He wasn't looking for another adult. There was no confusion about who his reference point was. He knew. He called me. I called my mother, who lived in another city, and told her, euphoric. She cried with me on the other end of the line. "You did it, daughter. You're doing it." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Not arrogantly, but factually. I was doing it. My son was healthy. He was developing. He was happy. And despite everything, he was loved. But along with the happiness came a strange pain. A pang I hadn't expected. I thought, and his father? Does he know his son is starting to talk? Does he care? The answer came quickly and harshly. Probably not. He had chosen not to know, not to ask, not to be present. So he didn't deserve to know. This milestone was mine. It was ours, not his. I treasured that moment like a precious jewel. I recorded it on my phone, sent audio messages to everyone close to me, posted it on social media with a caption that tried to disguise the emotion, but which was, deep down, a silent cry of victory. Today, he said "mommy" for the first time. People reacted with heart emojis, sweet comments, but no one really understood the weight that word carried. It wasn't just internet cuteness. It was confirmation that I had managed to cross the desert without letting my son die of thirst. In the following days, he started repeating "mommy" all the time. When he woke up, when he wanted to be held, when he was hungry, when he just wanted attention. And with each repetition, something inside me healed a little. Each mommy was a brick building a foundation that, for a long time, seemed impossible to exist. He called me and I answered. Always. Because that was the difference between me and his father. I answered. It was around this time that I began to realize my son was absorbing everything. He was already imitating me, banging on the pots and pans when I cooked, pretending to clean the floor with a cloth, making sounds as if he were talking on the phone. He was absorbing my routine, my presence, my way of existing in the world. And that made me reflect. What kind of example was I being? I was so busy surviving that I had forgotten to live in front of him. I decided to make small changes. Instead of just putting him in his high chair while I worked, I started narrating what I was doing. Look, mommy is cutting the carrot. Look at the color, it's orange. Look at the smell. It might seem silly, but I noticed he was paying attention. His little eyes followed my movements. His mouth opened when I tasted spices. His little hands clapped when I finished something. He was learning that work wasn't punishment. It was part of life. And, more importantly, that I was there with him, even in the middle of work. I started setting aside at least 15 minutes a day just for him. No cell phone, no pots on the stove, no worries about deliveries. I would sit on the living room floor, spread out the few toys he had, and play. For real. I'd make silly voices, pretend his teddy bear was talking to him, build towers of blocks just for him to knock down and laugh. In those 15 minutes, I wasn't an employee, I wasn't a cleaner, I wasn't a cook. I was just a mother. And my son was just a son. And that, I discovered, was sacred. One night, after putting him to bed, I sat on the sofa and thought about everything that had changed since the day his father left. I had changed. Not just physically, with permanent dark circles under my eyes and a thinner body from skipping meals, but internally. I had become a different person. Harder in some ways, more sensitive in others. I didn't laugh as easily, but when I did, it was genuine. I didn't trust as quickly, but when I did, it was deep. I had learned that the world isn't fair, but that didn't give me the right to give up. And the strangest thing, I had discovered I was capable of things I never imagined. Working 3 jobs, cooking industrially at home, cleaning offices in the early hours of the morning, carrying heavy loads, enduring pain, functioning without sleep. I didn't know I had that in me, and part of me wished I had never had to find out. But at the same time, there was a silent, almost ashamed pride in knowing that, when necessary, I didn't run away. I started writing down my son's milestones in an old notebook. 9 months, said Mom. 10 months, stood up alone. 11 months, took his first steps holding onto the table. I wrote everything down because I knew that in the future he would want to know. And I wanted to have answers. I wanted to be able to say, "Look, son, you didn't have a present father, but you had a mother recording each of your victories." One day, a customer who ordered lunch asked me, "And the father, does he help?" I took a deep breath and answered, without drama, without anger, "No, he left when my son was 2 months old. He doesn't help, he doesn't show up, he doesn't ask." She was embarrassed and apologized for asking. I said it wasn't necessary. "It's no secret, it's just my reality." And I realized I had reached a point where talking about it no longer shattered me. It hurt, but it didn't bleed. The word mom kept echoing through the house. And every time I heard it, I remembered why it all happened. I wasn't fighting for recognition. I wasn't proving anything to him, to my ex, to society. I was fighting because someone small depended on me, because someone had the right to grow up knowing they were loved, even when the world around them was cruel. In the next part, I'll tell you about my son's first birthday, a day that for many people is just a celebration, but for me it was an emotional turning point, because it was when I realized that despite having lost a partner, I had gained a purpose, and that purpose, unlike people, doesn't abandon you halfway through. My son's first birthday came as a shock. I remember looking at the calendar and thinking, 1 year. I survived a year. It wasn't a light realization, like saying, "Wow, how time flies." It was more of an internal assessment, almost an emotional audit. A year without a father, a year with 3 jobs, a year learning to be everything at once, a year in which each day was a small miracle, even when I didn't have the energy to call it a miracle. I wanted to throw a party. Not an internet party with themed decorations, organic balloons, and an Instagrammable table. I wanted a real party, a simple cake, a few decorations, people who truly cared, honest food, children's laughter echoing through the room. Above all, I wanted to mark that day as a reminder to myself. He made it this far, and so did I. Of course, the first thing that popped into my head was the mental spreadsheet of costs. Cake, snacks, soda, juice, disposable tableware, a simple party favor, maybe a wall decoration. Everything had a price. And each price was a part of the bill I'd already set aside for diapers, milk, rent. For a few minutes, I almost gave up. I thought, he won't even remember. He's still so small. It doesn't make a difference. But then I looked at him, trying to stand upright leaning on the sofa, laughing to himself at something only he could see. And I understood that that birthday wasn't just about future memories. It was about being present now. It was about me looking at that day and not just seeing a date on the calendar, but a milestone of resistance. So I did what I'd learned to do better than anything else in that last year: improvise. Didn't have money for store decorations? I cut out pictures from old magazines, made banners out of notebook paper, reused balloons left over from a building party, and wrote his name on a piece of cardboard with colored markers. Couldn't afford a catering service? I made the snacks, sweets, and cake myself. I spent the previous night rolling brigadeiros and frying cochinha with him sleeping in the bedroom and the radio playing softly in the kitchen, as if the music were a reminder that, despite everything, joy was still possible. I invited only a few people: my neighbor who saved so many mornings, 2 colleagues from the snack bar, a customer who became a friend because of the lunch boxes, my mother who traveled for hours just to be there. It wasn't a crowded hall, it was a cramped room, but each person in that room had witnessed some part of our struggle. They weren't guests, they were witnesses. On the day of the party, I woke up before sunrise, tidied the house, and dressed my son in his best outfit. a simple ensemble I'd received as a donation, but which looked like a runway show outfit on him. When I put him in front of the mirror, he smiled and clapped as if he also knew that this day was special. And it was. I set up the table with what I had: an old white tablecloth, the cake in the center, some plates with snacks around it, balloons stuck to the wall with tape. When I finished, I stepped back a few paces and looked. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. It was the fruit of sleepless nights, of carefully counted money, of love that wasn't abundant, but wasn't lacking either. The guests arrived gradually. My mother brought a simple gift and a look full of pride. My neighbor arrived with a soda and a bag of popcorn. One of my colleagues from the snack bar brought her son's used toy wrapped in magazine paper. And, as these people entered, I realized one thing. No one was there out of obligation. They were there because they wanted to be. When they sang Happy Birthday, I almost couldn't sing along. I looked at my son sitting in his makeshift chair, gazing at the candles with curious eyes, clapping without understanding, but feeling the energy of the moment. I thought about all the sleepless nights, all the bills paid at the cost of sleep, all the times I wanted to give up. And beside me, at that moment, wasn't the man who helped bring him into the world. There were people who, in some way, helped keep this world functioning for him. When it was time to blow out the candle, my mother leaned behind him and helped him blow it out. And I felt his absence, my father's, not as a void, but as a realization. He chose not to be here. And honestly, at that moment, I had a thought I never imagined I would have. Thank goodness, because that space couldn't be filled by someone who wasn't committed to what was happening there. After everyone had left, the house fell silent again. I sat on the living room floor amidst the pieces of broken balloons, the crushed cups, the crumbs on the carpet, and my son crawled towards me, smiling with cake smeared on his mouth. He climbed onto my lap, settled there as if that were his natural place in the world, rested his head on my chest and sighed wearily. It was there, in that silent aftermath of the party, that an important realization hit me. I had spent an entire year thinking my life had been reduced to paying bills and avoiding disasters. But no, my life had actually been expanded to accommodate a love I had never seen before. A love that made me work 3 jobs, yes, but also made me decorate my living room with notebook paper, stay up all night rolling brigadeiros, Brazilian chocolate fudge balls, and invent celebrations where the world only saw chaos. I looked inside myself that day and realized that something had changed in me. I was no longer just reacting to circumstances. I had begun to build, even if in pieces. I was no longer just that woman who had been left with a 2-month-old baby. I was the mother who, a year later, could make her son smile at a simple cake table, even with the absence stamped on the place where a father would have fit. I lay down that night exhausted, but different. For the first time in a long time, the tiredness didn't taste like defeat. It tasted like a mission accomplished. I knew the problems weren't over, that there would still be overdue bills, grueling shifts, burnt lunch, and crying spells. But I also knew that I had made it through a whole year and hadn't been destroyed in the process. On the contrary, I had been rebuilt. In the next stage, I'm going to touch on a point that many people avoid talking about: emotional loneliness. Because while I was juggling 3 jobs and raising my son tooth and nail, I was also a woman. And at some point, the question arose, do I still know how to be loved? Do I still want to be? That's when the story stops being just about financial survival and begins to confront the emotional survival of a single mother who, for a long time, believed she had no right to anything other than fighting. For a long time, I existed only as a tax identification number in emergency mode, working, paying bills, keeping my son alive. The woman I once was, with desires, dreams, vanities, curiosities, was pushed into a dark corner inside me, like a box we keep at the back of the closet and pretend we've forgotten about. But a closed box doesn't mean non-existent contents, and one day it started banging on the lid. Emotional loneliness didn't arrive all at once. It crept into the small moments of the day. in that heavy silence after my son fell asleep, when I saw couples entering the diner holding hands, in conversations between colleagues talking about dates, messages, someone asking, "Did you get home safely?" I heard all that and thought, nobody asks if I got home safely. Nobody waits for my message. Nobody notices when I disappear, except my son. And for a while, I tried to convince myself that this was enough, that a mother's love fills all the voids, until I realized it doesn't. And it's okay that it doesn't. One night, after putting my son to bed, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at myself in the mirror. Not that quick glance of someone checking if their hair looks acceptable before going out. It was a deep, almost cruel look. I saw dark circles under my eyes, new lines on my face, an old weariness in my gaze. But beneath it all, I could still see traces of the woman I had been before becoming a mother, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the way my mouth curved upwards when I thought of something good. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for months. Do I still exist beyond being a mother? The answer didn't come immediately. It came in fragments. It came when I declined an invitation for a simple coffee with a colleague because I didn't have time, even knowing that maybe I could fit it in if I really wanted to. It came when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd dressed up for myself, and not just out of obligation. It came when I found myself jealous of friends who posted photos from dates, while I was posting pictures of packed lunches and diapers on sale, and along with the answer came guilt, because it felt wrong, almost criminal, to admit that I missed something that had nothing to do with my son. I tried to kill that part in silence. I told myself, you don't have time for that. Focus on what matters. These things are luxuries, and you don't live a life of luxury. But ignored desire becomes a ghost, and it started haunting me at the most unexpected times. Like that day when, coming home from work, a stranger offered me his seat on the bus with a kind smile. I sat down, thanked him, and my heart raced in a way that made no sense. It wasn't passion, it wasn't real interest. It was the shock of being seen as a woman for 3 seconds, and not just as an exhausted mother with a baby stroller. It took me a while to admit that I missed being touched, and not just being pulled by a little hand asking to be held. I missed being hugged with the intention of caring for me, not just me caring for someone else. I missed a message in the middle of the day asking how I was, and not if the lunch payment had arrived. It wasn't empty neediness, it was a human need. I was still human, even after becoming a mother. But single motherhood comes with an invisible leash made of fear. Fear of introducing someone to my son and that person leaving. Fear of making the same mistake again. Fear of bringing someone into my home who doesn't deserve to be there. Fear of being judged. She hasn't even raised her son properly and she's already thinking about a man. Fear of everything. So, for a long time, the safest way to deal with this void was to pretend it didn't exist. And when it screamed too loudly, I filled my day with tasks until there was no room left to think. But one day, while scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon old photos. Me, laughing before I got pregnant. Me, on a beach. Me, wearing red lipstick at some party. Me, with friends. Me, with a sparkle in my eyes that I hadn't seen in the mirror for a long time. I didn't cry looking at those photos. For the first time, I didn't feel nostalgic for my old life as someone who wants to go back. I felt something different, a desire to integrate, to take pieces of that woman and bring them into who I was now. It was impossible to go back to being who I was. Motherhood didn't just add a role to my life, it completely reshaped me. But perhaps it was possible to be a mother and still be a woman, not in the pretty theory of ready-made phrases, but in the harsh practice of daily life. And that meant, above all else, reclaiming the right to desire, to rest, to pleasure, to companionship, to choose. The first time I accepted an invitation to go out that wasn't related to work or my son was almost an act of rebellion. A colleague from my lunchbox company invited me for coffee one Saturday afternoon, at a time when my mother could look after my son for a few hours. My impulse was to say no immediately. My brain already had the automatic response. Thank you, but I can't. But the phrase got stuck in my throat. Instead, I replied, "I can stay for an hour." An hour, 60 minutes, and I spent days feeling selfish about it. In that cafe, no one called me a warrior. No one asked about my son's father. No one asked me for a lunchbox recipe or an extra favor. We talked about movies, music, nothing important, and at the same time, everything I needed to remember that I still had taste, opinions, curiosity. I laughed, a carefree laugh, one that hadn't come close to me in months. I went home feeling light, but also scared, as if, by taking care of myself for an hour, I had betrayed someone. It took me a while to understand that there was no betrayal. There was balance. I didn't join a dating app. I didn't have the strength, the patience, or the confidence for that. But I started, little by little, to allow the possibility of one day being loved again to exist in my mind. Not as a goal, not as salvation, not as an urgent plan, just as a possibility, and that was already huge. I stopped repeating to myself that no one will ever want someone with a child, and started to rephrase, whoever is meant to stay will have to want me whole, with everything that comes with it. And even if no one wanted me, I would still have an enormous love waiting for me at home, calling me mom. The biggest turning point, however, wasn't external. It wasn't a meeting, a message, or flirting. It was internal. It was the day I got ready to stay home. I took my time showering, put on some nice-smelling lotion, wore clothes I liked, styled my hair in a way that flattered me, and applied light lipstick. No one was arriving. I didn't have photos to post. I didn't have events. It was just me, my son, and a desire to look at myself with affection. He saw me come out of my room all dressed up, smiled, and said, "Pretty mommy." And then I understood the order of things. I didn't need to wait for someone outside to see me to feel alive. My son already saw me. I was the only one missing. Of course, the loneliness didn't disappear as if by magic. There were nights when I would lie in bed and feel the emptiness on the other side of the bed like a minefield of memories. There were days when seeing a couple on the street still bothered me. There were moments when I still wondered if someone would ever enter our lives and stay, but that pain was no longer an open wound. It was a scar that from time to time itched. The most important thing was realizing that before any new relationship, I needed to rebuild my relationship with myself. And that wasn't self-help talk. It was a survival strategy, because nobody moves into a ruined house to truly live there. I needed first to put on a roof, fix the windows, sweep the inside floor. Not to receive someone, but so that my son and I could have a more habitable place inside. In the next part, I'll talk about money again, but in a different way. Because as my son grew up, I began to realize that working 3 jobs kept me alive, but also kept me trapped. And then another question arose that would change everything. How do I move beyond mere survival and begin, even slowly, to build a future? This is where work, son, exhaustion, and dreams begin to intertwine in a different way. For a long time, my financial life was a constant fire. I was running around with a small bucket trying to put out giant flames. I'd pay one bill here, another there, and before I could even breathe properly, another expense would appear. I lived in, if I can pay this month, I'll deal with it later mode. But later never came. There was always another bill, another emergency, another patch-up job, until one day I realized that if I kept just putting out fires, my son would grow up in a burnt-out field, and I wanted to at least start planting something. The question that triggered this turning point was simple but brutal. What if I get really sick? Not a scare, not a stress crisis. Something serious that would take me out of action for weeks, months. What would happen to him? I had no answer, and that scared me more than any warning of a power cut. Paying the month's bills was urgent, but building some kind of savings, however small, was starting to seem like a matter of survival as well. That's when I decided to face my money head on. No longer as a monster I avoided looking at so as not to panic, but as an enemy I needed to study to learn how to confront. One night, after my son fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with all the bank statements, paid bills, and accounts scribbled on loose pieces of paper, and I did something I had been putting off for a long time. Add it all up. How much came in, how much went out, where it was going. to see in numbers what I had only felt in my body. The result wasn't pretty. I discovered that, even with 3 jobs, I was living on the edge. I had no free time. Any unforeseen event, an expensive medicine, a piece of clothing that no longer fit, an unusually high electricity bill, threw me into debt. But instead of closing the notebook and pretending I hadn't seen it, I asked myself a different question. Where do I have power here? Because complaining about what I didn't have didn't change anything. But maybe I could tinker with the little I did have. The first decision was tough. I needed to transform at least one of my jobs into something more strategic, and not just another place where I traded hours for money and nothing more. The cleaning job was the one that most severely damaged my body for the least return. The snack bar was exhausting, but it gave me a job and some minimal stability. As for the lunch boxes, despite being chaotic, they had a potential I hadn't truly explored yet. They were mine. I could adjust the price, the clientele, the quality. I could grow if I could organize them. I started observing. Who bought from me frequently? What did these people praise the most? What was the most difficult and yielded the least return? I discovered that many people ordered lunch at the last minute, right before lunchtime, and I scrambled to deliver, rushing around constantly. But these were the people who were most often late with payments and asked for discounts. Others, who ordered in advance, were more loyal, paid on time, and valued my effort. So I made a choice that seemed crazy at first. I stopped accepting last-minute orders, only with 24 hours notice. Those who wanted it would adapt. Those who didn't would leave. At first, it hurt. The number of orders dropped. There were days when I wondered if I had messed up. But, little by little, something curious happened. Those who stayed started recommending me more. And with more organization, I managed to standardize the menu, buy supplies in bulk, and reduce waste. This meant more profit per meal, less desperate rushing, more predictability. It was still tough, still tiring, but it was no longer chaotic. Over time, I achieved a small victory that, for me, was huge, reducing my cleaning shift. I negotiated to get 2 days off a week. Did I lose a chunk of income? Yes, I did. But I gained something of immeasurable value, some free mornings, and I decided that those mornings wouldn't be occupied with more work, at least not with more of the same. I was going to use that time to study. Not college, not expensive courses, nothing like that. I went for the basics, free videos, handouts, content teaching simple finances, small business management, routine organization. It wasn't glamorous. It was hard work. I started by implementing small things first. I set aside a bank account just for the meal prep business. Everything that came in went there. I paid for expenses, calculated what real profit was. And then came the most important rule, which I established with almost religious seriousness. No matter how small the profit, 5% would not be touched. Never. It would go straight into a reserve. In the beginning, 5% was almost nothing. Coins. But for the first time, I had money that wasn't immediately destined to become a bill. It was there, quiet, like a tiny pillow between my son and the abyss. Empowering that small percentage became almost a game with myself. If I saved money on something, if I had some spare change from the market because I got a discount, if a client paid a little extra, I'd put it there, in reserve. Not because I thought it would save me from everything, but for an almost psychological reason. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of building something that wasn't just putting out fires. My son grew up amidst this process. One day, he saw me separating coins into a small, clear plastic box and asked what it was. I explained it as simply as possible. This is the money we save for what-ifs. He frowned. What if what? I smiled with a hint of pain, knowing the answer. What if you get sick and I need to buy medicine? What if we need to fix something around the house? What if mommy can't work for a few days? This money is for that, for when things don't go as planned. He didn't understand everything, of course. He was too young. But I knew that a seed was being planted there. My son wasn't going to grow up thinking that money is a monster that controls everything. He was going to understand from an early age that money is a tool. A difficult one, often unfair, but a tool nonetheless. And I wanted him, unlike me, to learn how to use the tool before the tool used him. As time went by, the 3 jobs didn't disappear all at once. It wasn't one of those movie-like twists where, out of nowhere, life becomes organized. The difference is that I started to become aware of where I wanted to go, and not just where I didn't want to sink. That changed everything. Instead of thinking, I need this to survive this month, I started thinking, what can I do today that brings me 1 millimeter closer to not having to work at this pace forever? Some of the solutions were practical: improving the presentation of the lunch boxes, retaining good customers, being punctual, treating it like a business, even if that business was just me and my stove. Others were internal: learning to charge what my work was worth, stopping giving automatic discounts out of pity for others, and above all, stopping believing that poverty is a fixed and permanent destiny. I didn't know if I would ever succeed in life in the way the world likes to portray it, but I was already overcoming something enormous within myself, the feeling that I was always a hostage. Little by little, with tiny margins, I managed to do something that, for many people, is basic, but for me was revolutionary. I bought a better mattress. It may seem random, but it wasn't. I slept on an old bed that left me with back pain every day. My son and I woke up exhausted. The day I lay down on that new mattress, I realized this is also the future. This is also taking care of us both. It's not just saving money for what if. It's also using what comes in to improve the now. No, I didn't become rich. No, I didn't open a restaurant overnight. No, I didn't go from being tight to comfortable as if by magic. But I went from absolute despair to partial control. And for someone who has lived with the feeling that life is a constant whirlwind, having control even in a small crack is a gigantic freedom. In the next part, I'll tell you about when his father reappeared. Because yes, he reappeared. Not as a hero, not as a perfectly repentant man, but as someone who realized too late the magnitude of the story he had abandoned. And that was the moment I had to decide, do I let him in or keep the door closed? And, most importantly, how do I protect my son from being hurt again? The hardest part was yet to come. I had just put my son to bed when my cell phone vibrated, a number I never expected to see again. My heart raced before my brain could process what was happening. I stared at the screen as if his name were a trap ready to explode. It wasn't. It was just a message, but it weighed like a detonator. Can we talk? I stood there, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone like a grenade. 2 words, 3 words if you count the question mark, and with them, 2 years of pent-up anger, sleepless nights, carefully counted money, silent tears. It all came to the surface at once. He wanted to talk, now. After disappearing, abandoning a 2-month-old baby, not sending a single reel, not asking if his son was alive or dead, now he wanted to talk. My first reaction was anger, pure and crystalline. I typed a sharp reply, full of cutting truths, and almost hit send. But I stopped. I took a deep breath. I deleted everything. And I asked myself the question that really mattered. Is this about me or about him? Because if it was about me, I'd send him to hell without blinking. But if it was about my son, I needed to have a different attitude, and it was about my son. It always has been. I didn't reply that night. I left the message unread and went to bed. I spent hours awake thinking about all the possibilities. Did he want to redeem himself? Did he want to meet his son? Did he want to apologize? Or worse, did he want to clear his conscience so he could sleep better that night without committing to anything real? I knew this kind of thing. People who come back not because they've changed, but because the guilt has started to weigh too heavily on them. The next day, I sat down calmly, had a coffee, and replied, "What do you want?" Straightforward, no beating around the bush, no opening for him to romanticize the abandonment with a pretty excuse. It took him a few hours to reply. When he did, the message was longer. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I was a coward, but I can't live without knowing about him anymore. I want to meet my son. My son. Now he was my son. 2 years ago, he had gone from being a crying baby. Now he was back to being a boy who walked, talked, laughed, played. He had lost everything, and part of me wanted to rub it in his face. You don't know the name of his favorite color. You don't know he's afraid of dogs. You don't know he sleeps hugging a worn-out teddy bear. You know nothing. But I didn't write that. I wrote, "First, you and I talk, alone. If I think you deserve it, we'll see about the rest." We arranged to meet at a cafe, neutral territory, far from home, far from his son, far from direct memories. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, his face different from what I remembered. Thinner, older, more tired perhaps. He stood up when he saw me, as if to greet me, but I sat down before he could attempt any gesture. There was no hug, no handshake. There were only two people who needed to have a conversation that should have happened 2 years ago. He began by apologizing. He said he had panicked, that he wasn't ready, that his life had been turned upside down, that he didn't know how to cope. I listened to everything in silence, with my arms crossed and a neutral face. When he finished, I asked, "And now are you ready?" He hesitated. "I don't know if anyone is ever completely ready, but I want to try." I leaned forward, looked him straight in the eye, and spoke with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed. "While you were panicking, I was working 3 jobs. While you didn't know how to cope, I learned how to cope, alone. You had time to process, to run away, to choose not to be present. I had no choice, so don't come here now, 2 years later, with a rehearsed excuse, expecting me to open the door because you've decided it's convenient to come back." He lowered his head. He was quiet. Then he said softly, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but it's not about me. It's about him. Every child deserves a father." I felt my blood boil. Every child deserves a father who is present from the beginning. Not a father who shows up when he feels like it, disappears when things get difficult, and reappears when guilt sets in. Do you think he needs someone like that? The silence was long. Then he asked, his voice breaking, "How is he?" And there I saw something I didn't expect. Tears. They weren't tears of manipulation. They were tears of real regret. Perhaps too late, perhaps insufficient, but real. I took a deep breath. He's fine. He's healthy, happy, bright. He doesn't know who you are. He asks me about his father sometimes, and I tell him the truth, that his father isn't here. But he has love. He has a roof over his head. He has food. He has a mother who will never abandon him. He asked if he could see a photo. I hesitated. Showing a photo seemed to grant access, and access needed to be earned, not given. But at the same time, denying him that would be gratuitous cruelty. I took out my phone, showed him a recent photo. My son smiling, holding an ice cream. He looked at it for too long, like someone looking at something they lost and only now understand its value. "He's gorgeous," he said, his voice trembling. "He looks like me." I replied sharply, "He's himself, and if you want to be a part of his life, it won't be on your terms. It will be on his. He doesn't owe you anything. You're the one who owes him something." I set rules. If he wanted to meet his son, he would start slowly. Very slowly. First, he needed to prove he was committed, not with words, with actions. Child support? 2 years behind. He would have to settle it. It wasn't about the money. It was about responsibility. If he couldn't even do that, how could I trust that he wouldn't disappear again at the first sign of trouble? He agreed. He said he would sort everything out. I made it clear. Settle things first. Then we'll talk about him meeting you, and even when that happens, it will be under supervision. You're not going to come in and disrupt his life. He has a routine. He has security. He has a structure. You're going to fit into that, or you're not going to get in. I left that cafe feeling neither victorious nor defeated. I felt exhausted. Exhausted from having to be the responsible adult again. Exhausted from having to protect my son from someone who should have been his natural protection. Exhausted from having to filter intentions, measure commitment, build bridges for someone who blew up the previous one. In the following weeks, he texted asking about his son. He sent money to start regularizing the child support payments. It wasn't the full amount, but it was something. I received it without celebrating. Money doesn't buy presents, but at least it showed that he was trying to act instead of just talking. The day arrived when I had to prepare my son. I sat down with him and explained in the simplest way I could, "Do you remember that you always ask me about your father?" He nodded, curious. "He wants to meet you, but only if you want to." He frowned, processing. "Is he going to live with us?" I shook my head. "No, he's going to visit, and only if you like him." My son thought for a moment and asked, "Is he going away again?" And that question broke my heart, because he was small, but he wasn't stupid. Somehow, he already understood that people can leave. I held his hands and said, "I don't know, my love, but I promise that if he goes, you'll still have Mommy, always." The first meeting was brief, in a park, with me present. I explained to my son that the man was his father. He became shy, hiding behind me. His father tried to start a conversation, offered him a toy. My son accepted, but didn't let go of my hand. It was strange, uncomfortable, tense. There was no magical recognition, no emotional hug. There was a confused child and a man carrying the weight of 2 years of absence. After we left, my son asked, "Is he coming back?" I said yes. He thought for a moment and said, "Okay, but I prefer you." And that's when I understood. My son didn't need a perfect father coming in right now. He needed to know that regardless of who came in or went out, he would always have someone who stayed. And that someone was me. In the next part, I'll talk about the hardest part of all, keeping the door ajar without losing control, protecting my son without preventing him from having the chance to meet his father, and above all, dealing with my own anger while trying to be fair. Because forgiving isn't forgetting, and accepting his presence back didn't mean the wound had disappeared. Letting him come back, even if only leaning against the door of our lives, was like holding a cracked glass. Any wrong move could cut someone. And that someone wasn't just me. It was, primarily, my son. I knew that the greatest pain wouldn't be seeing his father arrive, but seeing him leave again, if that happened. So every step I took was calculated like crossing a minefield, slowly, cautiously, prepared to retreat at any sign of danger. After their first meeting in the park, I observed my son more than his father. I wanted to see if it would affect him in a way that I would need to restrain. That night, I expected some crying fit, some insistent question, some different behavior, but he only asked at bedtime, "Mommy, will he come often?" I swallowed hard and replied, "He said he wants to, but coming often doesn't just depend on him wanting to. It depends on him making an effort." My son frowned, thought for a moment, and murmured, "If he doesn't come, it'll just be the two of us." And he turned to the side, hugging his teddy bear. A part of me broke with sadness, and another part rose with pride, because without realizing it, I had raised a boy who knew that just the two of us was already a whole world. Over time, the meetings became more controlled, always in a public place, always for short periods, always with me nearby. He would arrive somewhat nervous, trying to appear natural, sometimes talking too much, other times too quietly. He would bring toys, sweets, and gifts, and I would observe, not what he carried in his hands, but what he brought in his actions. Whether he arrived on time, whether he remembered what his son had said in the previous meeting, whether he was truly paying attention or just acting. The most curious thing is that the more he tried to get closer to his son, the more the mirror turned back on me. I found myself torn between two versions, the woman who wanted revenge, wanted him to feel every second of guilt, every weight of absence, and the mother who wanted her son to have the chance to build something, even something small, with his father. These two parts fought inside me all the time. The anger said, "Close that door. He doesn't deserve it." The lucidity repeated, "The one who deserves the chance is your son, not him." I needed to establish clear boundaries, not only for him, but for myself. I decided that there would be no contact between us that wasn't about the child, no nostalgic conversations, No reminiscing about the past, no revisiting wounds in face-to-face encounters. If I needed to talk about what he did to me, I would do it elsewhere. In therapy, in my notebook, alone in the shower. In front of my son, in front of him as a father, the focus was only one. That boy who now called out 2 names, but only truly trusted one. One day, my son ran to show his father a drawing, a stick figure with 3 characters, him, me, and his father. I saw that paper and felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy, but it hurt. Because in that crooked scribble, he tried to fit someone who had physically returned, but emotionally wasn't yet fully there, and fear struck me. Am I opening space for yet another drawn frustration? I set a silent rule within myself. I wasn't going to push them towards each other, but I also wasn't going to pull my son away if he wanted to get close. He had the right to form his own opinion, to like, to dislike, to want, to reject. I could guide him. I could protect him. I could be there as a safety net, but I couldn't decide for him who he should love or reject. This is hard to understand when you know the damage another adult can do, but it's necessary if you don't want your child to grow up using your resentment as absolute truth. There were disagreements too, promises he almost broke. Once, he made an appointment and then called at the last minute to say he couldn't come. I saw my son's face fall. He didn't cry, he didn't make a scene, but the expectation he had built up to show off a new toy evaporated in seconds. That night, he asked, "Mom, when people say they're coming, do they really have to come?" I took a deep breath. That was my most important lesson. They should, they don't always, but here at home, we try to keep our promises. If we can't, we tell the truth. He remained silent, absorbing it all. After he fell asleep, I sent a harsh message to his father. "You have no idea how much damage you almost caused today. Don't make any plans with him that you can't keep. For you, it's a schedule. For him, it's the world." He replied with apologies, saying that work had been complicated, that it wasn't on purpose. I responded curtly, "It doesn't matter if it was on purpose or not. The effect is the same. If you're going to show up halfway, it's better not to show up at all." I needed to learn to forgive in a different way. It wasn't a forgiveness that absolves, that forgets, that erases. It was a functional forgiveness. Something like, "I won't allow what you did to me to make me so bitter that it ruins what he can build with you if you are worthy of it, but I also won't pretend nothing happened." It's an almost impossible balance. Sometimes I erred on the side of rigidity, sometimes on the side of permissiveness. But I adjusted, always with a question in mind. Does this protect or does this imprison my son? Gradually, my son began to understand, in his own way, who that man was. Not as an ideal father, not as a hero, as someone who was trying to reconnect after having been distant. One day, leaving one of these meetings, he said something that struck me deeply. "Mom, I like him, but I don't need him to be happy, right?" I smiled with a lump in my throat. "No, my love, you need love, respect, care. From someone who truly gives you that. The rest is just a compliment." And it was there that I realized that somehow I had succeeded. My son wasn't growing up with a hole in his chest the size of his father's. He did have space, yes. A curiosity, a desire to understand. But it wasn't a desperate emptiness. Because, before any reconciliation, he already had a foundation. He was certain that someone, me, would never leave. I, for my part, had to swallow my pride many times. There were moments when seeing my son laughing with his father squeezed me in a strange place. Not because I wanted that man back. That door, for both of us as a couple, was locked. But because it was like watching someone play with a toy that almost broke and you spent years gluing it back together. It's scary to see the hand of the one who broke it get close again. But I breathed and remembered, it's not a toy. It's a child. And she is not my possession. She is my responsibility. The door remained ajar, neither wide open, as he might have wanted one day, nor locked, as I often wished to do. And in that narrow space, we built something crooked, full of patches, but real. It wasn't the family I dreamed of when I got pregnant. It wasn't the margarine commercial image the world insists on selling. It was our story, patched up, tired, resilient. In the next stage, I'm going to shift my focus away from him, the father, and return to the one who has always been the center of everything, my son. Because, as he grew older, he began to understand the world more clearly. He started asking more difficult, sharper, more concrete questions, and I had to choose again. Do I tell him a sugar-coated version of the truth to protect him, or do I tell him the whole truth carefully to set him free? That's where single motherhood shows its rawest side, raising a child who knows the truth without carrying the trauma as their destiny. Young children sense before they understand. My son always felt that there was something different in our house, even before he knew what to call it. He would see a classmate saying, "My dad is going to pick me up." He would see cartoons with complete families. He would see Father's Day commercials. And he would look at me with a question in his eyes that he didn't yet know how to ask aloud. Over time, that question gained words. And that's when motherhood stopped being just physical and financial, and also became a daily exercise in emotional honesty. The first time he asked directly, he was about 5 years old. We were tidying his room, putting toys away in the box, when he blurted out, almost casually, "Mommy, why doesn't my dad live with us?" It wasn't a drama. It wasn't crying. It was pure, raw curiosity. I stopped with the toy in my hand, took a deep breath, and decided I wasn't going to run away. He deserved an answer that fit in his head, but that didn't betray the truth. I said, because he and Mom are different in some ways. He wasn't ready to live with us. Mom stayed. He left. He was silent for a few seconds, fiddling with a stroller. Then came the second question. Did he leave because I was born? That hurt in a place I didn't know still existed. I knelt down to his level, held his face in my hands, and spoke slowly, as if each word were an anchor. No, you don't push anyone away. Whoever leaves chooses to go. You are a reason to stay, not to run away. I repeated this so many times afterward that it became almost a mantra at home. As he grew older, the questions became less innocent and more pointed. If he knew I existed, why did it take him so long to come see me? Was he like this when he lived with you? Were you sad when he left? I didn't want to turn his father into a cartoon villain, but I also wasn't going to invent a hero that didn't exist. So I found a middle ground. I talked about actions, not essence. Instead of saying he is this or that, I said he did this and it hurt. Because my son needed to understand that character is judged by what a person does, not just by what they say. One day, when he was older, he came home from school upset. A classmate had said that a child without a father is a problem, and laughed, calling him incomplete. I wanted to go to the school, drag that boy by the ear, and give him a lecture on children's emotional responsibility. But instead, I sat with my son on the bed and asked him how he felt when he heard that. I was angry, then sad. Then I remembered that you always say that whoever talks about us is talking more about themselves. I smiled inwardly. Something was changing. I explained to him that family doesn't come in a single mold, that he wasn't less of anything for not living with his father, that he had something many people didn't, clarity about who was truly on his side. You know who you can trust, son. Not everyone does. He looked at me and asked, "And can I trust him?" The him carried weight. It was his father. I took a breath. You can trust that he loves you in the way he can. But if you're going to trust someone not to leave, to always be here, it's me. It's us. I will never promise you what I can't deliver. The hardest part was resisting the temptation to excuse his father's behavior with phrases like, "He loves you, he just doesn't know how to show it," all the time. Sometimes that was true. Sometimes it was a ready-made excuse. I started to be careful. I wasn't going to berate him, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat it either. If he asked why his father missed a date, I didn't invent work, traffic, or a non-existent illness. I would say, "He didn't come. He said he had such and such. You have the right to be sad and angry about that." Validating his feelings was more important than preserving any image of being an adult. Meanwhile, I was training my son to look at his own history with dignity, not shame. When he introduced himself and said, "I live with my mother," I never added a "only" before it. To the world, "only with mom" seems like little. To us, it was everything. When someone made a hurtful comment near him, like, "Where's this child's father?" I would answer loudly, without stuttering, "The father exists, but I'm the one raising him. It's working well this way." My son listened, and every time I stood up for myself, he gained another brick to build his own self-esteem. My biggest fear was that one day the pain would become an excuse, that he would use his father's absence as justification to hurt other people, to be irresponsible, to repeat history in another role. So I made a point of, whenever the subject came up, looking him in the eyes and saying, "What they did to you is not a model, it's a warning. You can feel anger, you can feel longing, you can feel sadness, but you don't need to do to others what they did to you." I wanted him to know that his past explained a lot, but didn't determine everything. Some nights I would cry after those conversations, not because I regretted what I said, but because of the weight of being the translator of such a harsh reality for someone so young. I would think, who explains all this to me? And the answer was always the same: nobody. I learned through experience, making mistakes one day, getting it right the next, apologizing when I realized I had gone too far. Because yes, I also apologized to my son a few times, for having answered sharply on a day when I was exhausted, for having taken too long to notice his sadness, for having let my hurt feelings show. And every time I did that, he learned that adults aren't perfect. They're responsible. Over time, I realized he began to look at his own story with less "why me?" and more, "It was like this, so what now?" He didn't deny the pain. He didn't pretend he didn't care. But he also didn't see himself as a victim. One day, in a school essay, the topic was my family. He wrote, "My family is different from most of my classmates. I live with my mother. My father doesn't live with us, but I know who he is. I get sad sometimes, but I know my mother always has. So I've never been alone." When I read that, I cried in a way I hadn't cried in a long time, because everything was there: the absence, the truth, the pain, and the foundation. In the next and final stage, I closed this script by returning to the beginning. That woman sitting on the floor with a 2-month-old baby in her lap, listening to the door slam. If I could talk to her today, after everything, I would say things she might not believe, but that I need to tell her, because in the end, this story isn't about a man who left. It's about a mother who stayed, and about a boy who grew up knowing that even when the world fails, true love remains. If I could go back in time and sit next to that woman I was, the one with the 2-month-old baby in her arms, her body exhausted, her heart broken, and the door still echoing with the sound of abandonment, I wouldn't say, "Everything will be all right," because that's a lie we tell ourselves to seem strong, but it doesn't help when you're in the middle of chaos. What I would say is, you will survive. And more than that, you will raise an incredible boy in the middle of the desert. I would sit beside her, look at the sleeping baby's face, and say slowly, "I know you think it's over, that the life you imagined died with the sound of that door. But it didn't die. It just changed, and it will change so many more times that you'll lose count. But in every change, you'll be there, present, standing, even when the ground gives way." I would say that in the coming months, she will work at a pace no human body was made to withstand, that she will clean floors at 5 in the morning, fry hamburgers at midnight, cook lunch until her hand trembles, that she will sleep in fragments, cry in secret, doubt herself in silence. But I would also say that every time she thinks she can't take it anymore, she will look at him, at the baby who becomes a child, who becomes a boy, and she will find the strength, always. I would say that money will be a daily battle, but that she will learn to transform little into enough. That she will discover that luxury isn't about having a lot, it's about having the essentials without desperation. That she will put together birthday parties with notebook paper, creative menus with whatever is left in the fridge, and will be happier at those improvised tables than at any banquet, because love doesn't fit into a budget, but it honors the meals it manages to put on the table. I would warn her that people will judge. They'll say she works too much, that she doesn't give her son enough attention, that she's too much of a victim, that she should move on faster. They'll compare, measure, and give their opinions without having lived a single day in her place. But I would tell her not to explain too much, because those who live don't need to justify, and those who judge won't understand anyway. I would say, filter the voices. Listen only to those who lift the weight with you. The rest is noise. I would reveal something she doesn't yet imagine. She will be emotionally alone for a while. She will miss being seen as a woman, being touched with affection, having someone ask how she is. She will feel guilty for missing that, as if loving her son were incompatible with needing adult love as well. But I would say that this is normal, that this is human, and that one day, when she is ready, not when the world says so, but when she knows, someone might appear and see in her not a repair project, but a whole woman who went through fire and didn't turn to ashes. I would also tell her about his return, the Father's, that he will come back at some point, laden with apologies, regrets, and promises, that it will hurt to have to make an opening for him because of the son, even when everything inside you wants to lock the door shut for good. But I would say that this pain will be worth it because it will teach her son something valuable, that forgiveness is not absolving, it's allowing each person to write a new story without the obligation to forget the old one, and that a mother is not a judge, she is a safety net. She will support, but she will not imprison. I would say that her son will grow up asking difficult questions, that it will hurt every time he asks, "Why did Dad leave?" And she has to look him in the eye and tell the truth without turning pain into poison, that she will learn to separate what is protecting the truth from what is sparing the illusion, and that, in the end, he will be grateful for her honesty, even when it hurts, because truth, however harsh, anchors. Lies drown. I would warn her that she will transform into a person she doesn't recognize sometimes, tougher in some places, softer in others, that she will lose the easy patience she had, but will gain an emotional resilience that no book teaches, that she will become someone who doesn't laugh without reason, but when she laughs, it's genuine, who doesn't trust without testing, but when she trusts, it's deep, who doesn't promise without being able to deliver, but when she promises, she keeps her word until the end. I would reveal that, in a few years, she will look in the mirror and see scars, not only on her calloused hands, not only on her tired body, but also in her eyes. But these scars won't be ugly. They will be maps, they will tell her, and one day her son, that she crossed the desert and that she didn't do it passively. She did it by digging wells, setting up tents, holding the child, and making each step count. I would say primarily that her son will be okay, that he will grow up knowing what true love is because he saw it every day in practice, that he won't be perfect. Nobody is. But he will know the difference between being present and just showing up, that he will know the value of those who stay because he grew up seeing his mother always there, that he will respect women in a way that many don't learn because he was raised by a woman who respected herself enough not to accept crumbs, neither for herself nor for her son. I would sit next to that woman from years ago with the baby in her lap and conclude by saying, "You think this is the end, but it's the beginning of a story you can't even imagine yet. A story that doesn't have a fairy tale happy ending, but it has something better. It has dignity. It has truth. It has presence. You will raise this boy practically alone, yes, and he will be incredible, not despite you, but because of you. Today, I look at my son and see everything he has become. A boy who laughs loudly, who hugs tightly, who cries when he needs to, who asks what he doesn't understand, who helps when he can. He didn't grow up rebellious. He didn't grow up feeling inferior. He grew up knowing that family isn't a format, it's a commitment, and that love isn't perfect, but it's enough when it's true. If someone asks me if it was worth it, the 3 jobs, the sleepless nights, the bills paid in pennies, the crying spells, the body aches, the emotional loneliness, I look at him and answer without blinking, It was worth it. Every second, every tear, every fall. It was worth it because he is here, whole, loved, safe, and because I discovered that I am capable of much more than I thought possible. I'm not a hero. Heroes have superpowers. I only have commitment. But I've discovered that commitment, when it's true, moves mountains. And if there's one thing I want my son to take with him throughout his life, and that other single mothers read and keep in their hearts, it's this: you will get tired, you will doubt yourself, you will want to give up, but the next day you will get up again, because there is someone who needs you, and you are enough. You always have been. The door slammed shut, yes, but we stayed, and we built a home anyway. End.